Sarah woke up early in the morning to the sound of rain tapping softly on her window. The day started like any other. She made herself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Deep down, Sarah felt a strange worry, but she didn't know why. Her life was predictable: work at the office, to-do lists, and endless notifications on her phone. Sarah didn't think much about anything beyond her weekend plans. Her days were filled with comfort, but deep inside, she felt something was missing. That morning, she felt a bit tired but ignored it. On her way to work, she scrolled through her phone, reading the news and liking posts without thinking. The world around her seemed so loud and busy that she never found time to stop and think. When Sarah got to her office, she suddenly felt dizzy. She thought it might be from stress or not getting enough sleep. "I need to get some water," she thought. But as she took a step toward the kitchen, everything started to fade. "What's happening to me?" she wondered in fear, holding onto the wall to keep herself from falling. She could hear her coworkers calling her name, but their voices were getting quieter and quieter. Her heart was beating fast, and then, silence. Sarah opened her eyes and saw her body lying on the floor. Her coworkers were rushing around her. Some were calling for an ambulance, while others tried to wake her up. But no matter how much she shouted or tried to reach them, they didn't hear her. She felt something pulling her away, dragging her into a dark place. At that moment, Sarah realized how fragile life was. Everything she thought was important, her work, her phone, her meetings, didn't matter anymore. The darkness around her grew deeper and colder. Fear filled her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. "Is this the end?" she thought, feeling terrified. Sarah had never thought much about death or what might come after it. She felt like she was falling into a bottomless hole, and there was no one to save her. But this wasn't the end. Her normal day had ended, and something extraordinary was just beginning. Sarah felt herself stop falling into the darkness. The space around her was still, but it wasn't comforting. It was heavy and frightening. All she could see was endless blackness. It felt alive, as if something was there, watching her. Her fear grew stronger when she heard a faint sound in the distance. At first, it was just a soft whisper, barely noticeable. But it grew louder and closer, turning into a chorus of low, scary voices. The voices didn't speak in words, but Sarah understood them. They were accusing her, judging her, making her feel like she deserved to be there. She wanted to run, to hide, but she couldn't move. Her fear grew into panic. "Who are you? Why am I here?" she screamed in her mind. But there was no answer. The voices grew louder, pressing down on her, filling her head with noise. Then, suddenly, a light appeared in the distance. At first, it was just a tiny, but it grew bigger and brighter as it came closer. This light wasn't just bright, it was warm and comforting, like a ray of hope in the middle of the darkness. Sarah felt the light pulling her toward it, lifting her out of the darkness. The closer she got, the less afraid she felt. The voices that had been surrounding her just moments ago were now gone. All she could hear was silence and a gentle feeling of peace from the light. When the light completely surrounded her, she felt her fear disappear. The light wasn't just something she could see, it reached deep into her soul. It seemed to know everything about her, her happiness, her mistakes, her doubts. But instead of judging her, it filled her with love. A powerful, overwhelming love that brought tears to her eyes. From the light, someone stepped forward. Sarah recognized him instantly, even though she had never seen him before. It was Jesus. His presence was strong yet gentle, and he radiated peace and kindness. His eyes were full of light, but there was also sadness in them, as if he understood all the pain and struggles of the world. "Sarah," he said her name. His voice was soft and calming, but it carried a deep meaning, as though every word mattered. She tried to speak, but her words wouldn't come out. "You are so close to staying in this darkness," he said. "But I brought you here so you could see. I want to show you a truth that will change everything." Sarah couldn't take her eyes off him. She felt small and unimportant, yet completely safe and loved. His words felt like they were healing her from the inside. "What do you want to show me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "You need to see what is happening in this world and what is coming next," he said. "You will go back, but first, you must understand that every choice a person makes shapes their eternity." With those words, Jesus extended his hand toward her. The moment Sarah touched it, she felt her spirit being lifted, as if she was being carried to another place. She left the light behind, but she was no longer afraid. She knew she was about to see something important. Sarah felt herself in a completely different place. The warm light that had surrounded her faded, and she was now standing in the middle of a huge, futuristic city. Skyscrapers reached high into the sky, and the streets were glowing with bright lights. Everything looked clean, organized, and almost perfect, like something out of a movie. But Sarah could feel that something was very wrong. The air was cold and heavy, and the silence was unnerving. She looked around and saw people walking through the streets. At first, they seemed normal, but as she watched closely, she noticed something strange. Their faces were blank, showing no emotion, as if they weren't really alive. Their movements were stiff and robotic, and each of them had the same mark, a small, glowing symbol on their right hand or forehead. Sarah watched as people stood in lines at machines, scanning their marks to receive food, money, or access to buildings. Everything seemed efficient and orderly, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. She felt the weight of this place pressing down on her, as though the air itself was filled with sadness and pain. "What is this?" Sarah asked, turning to Jesus, who was standing beside her. His face was serious, and though his eyes still radiated love, they were filled with sorrow. "This is the world people have chosen," he said. "They accepted the mark, believing it would make their lives easier. But by doing so, they gave away their freedom and their souls." Sarah's heart sank as she continued to watch. She saw a little boy, no older than 10, step forward to scan his hand. His eyes were filled with fear, but he didn't resist. Beside him stood his parents, who remained silent, looking away as if they were too afraid to do anything. "But why would they accept this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with sadness. "It is a lie," Jesus said. "They were told it was safe, helpful, and necessary for a better life. But by accepting it, they surrendered their will. They can no longer choose my path. This mark has bound them to a system that rejects me." Jesus lifted his hand, and another scene appeared before Sarah. She now saw small groups of people hiding in the shadows, avoiding drones that flew through the air, scanning everything below. Giant screens on the sides of buildings showed messages encouraging people to be united and part of the system. "These are the ones who refuse the mark," Jesus said. "But they pay a high price. They gave up comfort and safety to keep their souls. This is the choice everyone will have to make." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she looked at the scene. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had known the world was moving toward more technology, but she never imagined it could lead to something like this. "You must warn them," Jesus said, turning to her. His voice was calm but firm, filled with authority. You will return to tell them what you have seen. They need to know this is not just technology. It is a choice, one that will decide their eternity. Sarah's heart felt heavy with fear and sadness, but also a growing sense of purpose. She wanted to ask more questions, to understand everything, but the scene around her began to dissolve, like pieces of a dream breaking apart. She knew she was being sent back, and that her life would never be the same. When the vision disappeared, Sarah found herself standing next to Jesus once again. His face radiated love and strength, but there was also a deep seriousness in his eyes. Sarah felt as though he could see every part of her, her fears, doubts, and sadness. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but filled with meaning. "You've seen what most people cannot. You've seen what lies ahead if the world continues on this path. You must share this with them." Sarah's heart pounded. The task seemed overwhelming. She wanted to say something, to explain that she wasn't ready. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who would believe me? I'm just an ordinary person." Jesus stepped closer and placed his hand on her shoulder. Warmth filled her, calming her fears. "I choose those who are willing," he said. "It doesn't matter what you've done or how small you think you are. What matters is your heart and your readiness to follow me. Don't be afraid. I will always be with you." He raised his hand, and suddenly Sarah saw scenes from the world she knew. People were glued to their screens, scrolling endlessly through their phones, wearing devices that seemed to control their lives. They laughed and smiled, but their eyes looked empty, as though they had lost something important. "These technologies are not evil by themselves," Jesus said. "But the enemy uses them to distract and confuse. He makes people depend on the world instead of me. They stop searching for truth because it feels uncomfortable. They stop hearing my voice because the noise of the world is too loud." Sarah saw large crowds of people gathered in one place. They raised their hands, showing the marks on their foreheads and wrists. They looked happy, thinking they were part of something great. But behind them stood a dark, frightening figure, its glowing eyes filled with malice. "What is that?" Sarah asked, feeling her heart race with fear. "That is the one who deceives them," Jesus replied. "The beast. He tells people they can live without me, that they don't need me. But the path he leads them on ends in destruction." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched. She saw some people trying to escape, but most stayed, following blindly without question. "I have to do something," she cried, looking at Jesus. "Yes," he said gently but firmly. "You must warn them. They need to understand that the mark is not just a piece of technology, it is a choice. A choice to turn away from me. It is a symbol of rejection, one that separates them from me forever." Jesus' gaze held hers, steady and full of love. "You will face resistance," he said. "Not everyone will want to hear the truth. Some will mock you, others will reject you. But speak with love, and do not be afraid. I will be with you every step of the way. This is my message through you." Sarah nodded, though her heart felt heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know how she would accomplish this, but she trusted him. She felt a spark of courage growing inside her, stronger than her fear. "You will return now," Jesus said. "But remember everything you have seen. You must share it with those who are ready to listen." As his words settled in her heart, Sarah felt her body being pulled back. The light around her began to fade, and she heard Jesus' voice one last time, "Do not be afraid. I am always with you." Sarah woke up with a sharp gasp. She was back in her body, lying in a hospital bed. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, and the sound of machines beeped steadily around her. A nurse stood nearby, her face a mix of shock and relief. "She's awake," the nurse called out, waving to the doctor. "We thought we lost her." Her heart stopped for several minutes. Sarah blinked, trying to understand where she was. Her body felt heavy, and her chest ached as she instinctively placed a hand over her heart. "I'm alive," she whispered, as if trying to convince herself. The doctor leaned over her, his voice calm but serious. "You're lucky to be here," he said. "We worked hard to bring you back, but you were gone for several minutes." Sarah nodded weakly, but she knew it wasn't luck. She remembered everything, the visions, the light, and the mission Jesus had given her. Though her body felt weak, her mind was clear, and her heart was filled with a sense of purpose she had never known before. In the days after her return, Sarah struggled to process everything she had experienced. Her emotions were overwhelming, a mix of gratitude for her second chance, fear of the responsibility she now carried, and sadness for the world she had seen. She often sat by her window, looking outside, but the view didn't seem the same anymore. The things that used to fill her life, work deadlines, social media, weekend plans, felt small and meaningless compared to the mission that now weighed on her heart. Images of the people with the marks, their empty eyes, and the cold, controlled world haunted her. She couldn't forget the fear in the little boy's eyes or the silence of his parents. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself. "Why me?" she whispered to herself one night, tears running down her face. The question echoed in her mind, but deep down, she already knew the answer, "Because you are willing." A few weeks later, Sarah began sharing her story. At first, she told only her closest friends. Some listened with wide eyes, clearly moved by her words. Others dismissed her experience, saying it was just a strange dream or a result of her near-death trauma. "Do you really believe all this happened?" one friend asked, looking at her skeptically. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "I didn't just see it, I felt it. It was real. The world is heading towards something dangerous, and most people don't even realize it." Her confidence grew stronger each time she shared her story. Soon, she began speaking to small groups at local churches and community centers. At first, the gatherings were small, just a few people sitting quietly as she spoke. But as word spread, more and more people began showing up. One evening, after speaking at a church, a young woman approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I've been so distracted by everything in my life, my phone, work, just trying to keep up. I barely pray anymore. But your story made me realize how far I've drifted from God. I want to come back to Him." Sarah smiled gently, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. "It's never too late," she said. "He's always waiting for you." Encounters like this gave Sarah the strength to keep going, even when doubt and fear crept in. But not everyone welcomed her message. At one event, a man stood up in the middle of her talk and interrupted her. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "You just had a hallucination. Do you really expect us to believe in these marks and visions?" Sarah paused for a moment, her heart pounding. But she remembered Jesus' words, "Speak with love and do not be afraid." Looking at the man calmly, she replied, "I can't force you to believe me, but I know what I saw. This isn't just about some far-off future, it's about the choices we make every day. Will we keep following the distractions of this world, or will we listen to God's voice? All I ask is that you think about it." The room fell silent. Though the man didn't say anything else, Sarah noticed a few people nodding quietly. As her story began to spread online, it reached more people than Sarah ever imagined. Videos of her talks were shared widely, sparking discussions and debates. Some viewers felt inspired to reconnect with their faith, while others dismissed her as a fraud or called her delusional. But Sarah didn't let the criticism discourage her. "I'm not here to convince everyone," she often reminded herself. "I'm here for the ones who are ready to listen." Over time, her faith grew stronger. One night, after a long day of traveling and speaking, Sarah sat alone in her small room. She opened her Bible, looking for comfort, and her eyes fell on a verse she had read many times before. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." John 1 verse 5. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. "Thank you for being my strength. Thank you for reminding me that even when I feel small, your light is enough." As the years passed, Sarah's story touched the lives of countless people. Families who heard her message began talking about faith together for the first time in years. People who felt lost or overwhelmed by the distractions of life found hope in her words. Even those who doubted her story admitted that it made them think about their choices in a new way. Sarah knew her journey wasn't easy, but she felt peace knowing she was following the mission Jesus had given her. Every talk, every conversation, and every prayer was another step toward helping people see the light. Her life became a testament to hope and faith. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance to choose the light. If this story touched your heart or made you think, support our channel by clicking the subscribe button and giving this video a like. It helps us share these important messages with more people. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Sarah's experience? Do you believe in stories like hers? Leave a comment below, let's discuss it together. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next video.